Morning again. Another very dark video this morning. Video flying all over the place. Made no expense to get the tech right in this, didn't I? Hold on. Nonsense. Anyway, just wanted to end this Hammer Horror Dracula review nonsense with a review, not so much a review, just a final say on my number one Dracula film, quite apt in this weather, which is of course 1958's Dracula, also known as the Horror Dracula in the States for some reason. For me, this is the most important Hammer movie ever made and the most important Dracula movie ever made. Not my favourite Hammer film, but close. So this was the very first Dracula film to be filmed in colour. The Curse of Frankenstein, which came out the previous year, was the first. I don't know if it was the first horror movie in colour. It might, but it was certainly the first time we had Frankenstein in colour, and that changed everything. Spoiler alert: I think The Curse of Frankenstein might well be Hammer's best movie. It was absolutely just perfect. And then this came along the following year, and basically did for Frankenstein. What that film, did for Dracula, what that film did for Frankenstein is what I'm trying to say. Very bad. It's very early. I got a cup of tea here, so I'll have a sip of this. Anyway, so it basically put Dracula in colour, and it's no disrespect to the Universal Draculas. I always thought that the Universal Draculas were the weakest of Universal's films. I think they're Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy movies are all first-rate. Creature of the Black Lagoon, I think, is fantastic, and that came out many years later. That was a 50s film rather than a 30s movie. I always thought that the Dracula films were, Dracula and the other vampire films that Bella was in. There's something. Dracula, the 1931 Dracula movie, has a fantastic opening. It has incredible lavish scenery. It looks astonishing. It's a beautifully filmed and framed movie, and it's super important because other than Nosferatu from 1922, I don't think there'd been any vampire movie that had been so culturally impactful and tried to do such a good retelling of the Stoker story and made Dracula feel alive. When I was a kid, I thought Count Dracula was a real person, and that's through the power of film. So that was good, but I think once they get into the second half of that movie, and it's mainly just set in a boardroom and people just talking, it just loses a lot of the momentum. What Hammer did with Dracula is they made it a lot less, accurate to the source material. It does have certain elements, but it's not really a retelling of Stoker's story. But they just made it a visceral, thrilling film for the modern audience, and that's exactly what this is. I think Peter Cushing's Van Helsing here is the best version, the best Van Helsing we've ever had on screen, and his performance is one of his strongest. I always thought that Peter Cushing was better as Frankenstein because he had the chance to play an evil character. And when we get to Frankenstein must be destroyed, that's probably Peter Cushing's best performance in terms of how maniacal he is. But here as Van Helsing, there's something really charming and heroic and good-natured about him. Again, he's mesmerising to watch. He was always a really enjoyable actor to watch, and he's very physical in this film. He just comes across as a very capable person. Count Dracula, played by Christopher Lee. The moment, he's the courteous host here, who also is a feral vampire, and the way in which he snaps from being a courteous host to being that, fanged, bloods on his mouth, staring-eyed fiend. It's a phenomenal shot, and it showcases this man is a monster. I don't know why as well. There's a bit. There's a bit where there's a blood transfusion scene halfway through this film that always made me feel nauseous. I hate blood transfusions and needles in films. I've just got a thing about them. They make me feel sick, and it always made me feel really queasy. And for a film to have been made in the 50s that made me feel sick is impressive. And I don't know what else I can say about the climax of this film. The final showdown between Van Helsing and Dracula here is hands down not only the best showdown that we ever got in any of the Hammer Dracula movies, the best showdown we ever got in any of the Hammer vampire movies, Quite possibly the best showdown we ever got in any of the Hammer movies. My absolute favourite final encounter in any Dracula movie, Hammer or not, and one of my favourite endings to any horror film. I would put it on a pedestal that high because I just think it's so snappy, punchy, to the point, doesn't waste any time. It does what it needs to do, and the disintegration scene and the way that Peter Cushing uses the candlesticks, dive over the table, pulls the curtains down, the way Christopher Lee dissolves for its time, that was absolutely state of the art. I've always said there's a couple of scenes that stuck with me in movie making that were horrific and yet genuinely ahead of the time. Raiders of the Lost Ark, the ending of that with all the melting and head explosion and stuff. Still don't know how the hell that got a PG rating. Absolutely horrific and incredible scene with practical effects. This one from 1958 is on that level in terms of the way they did it, the way they filmed it. It just looks, even now, absolutely brilliant. And it's genuinely, I imagine when people saw this in the cinemas in 1958, they would have been absolutely horrified because it's just genuinely shocking and phenomenal for its time. Brilliant ending. Probably the best disintegration scene I've ever seen in any vampire film. I just think it's amazing. And the film that's built around all of this is great. The gothic scenery, the architecture. It's a beautiful looking movie. The score is fantastic. The cinematography is brilliant. The costumes, the dialogue, the camera work. This is a fantastic film. Easily in the top 10, quite possibly top 5 Hammer movies. Not just Hammer movies. Just. In fact, I'm going to scrub that again. This is easily in the top 5 Hammer movies, but possibly in the top 10 of my favourite horror films of between the 1950s and 1980s. This is just, what I'm trying to say really badly is this is an amazing movie. I'll just stick to that. Instead of putting it in different categories, this is an amazing movie. If I do a Hammer ranking in my top 10 films, this is going to be in there very, very high up. It is just genuinely wonderful. And I'm really excited because I've seen the original cut, I've seen the American cut, I've seen the Japanese footage that was missing when they reinstalled it all, and there's a new version coming out in October that I'm really interested to see with extra scenes and new colour scheme and everything. It's timeless. It's genuinely timeless. And if you're only going to watch one Hammer Dracula movie, make it the original. It was the original, the best, unbettered. I love the 1992 Dracula. I think that's a great story. But I still think this, with the fact that it's only 82 minutes in length as well, is my favourite Dracula film and the one that I would go to in a heartbeat above all others. So that's Dracula from 1958. Glowing recommendation, wonderful movie. They don't make films like this anymore, and it's not just the horror aspect of it that was so much ahead of its time. It's in terms of how people are now. I've mentioned to a few people about my disdain for modern horror. There's still horror films I like, but how almost every horror film now looks the same, has the same sort of digital camera work. Nighttime scenes, like horror films are really, like this, really, really awful, really hard to see. Most of the heroes and heroines in horror films are teenage or young 20-something Americans that have just awful attitudes about everything. They're very self-important and spoilt and privileged, and they just don't come across like the heroes of old, like the Hammer movies, where you either had someone like Van Helsing was a wonderful hero, or just characters that were ordinary everyday people forced into great situations and they would struggle and fight and the power of good would survive. I just miss that about horror. And this does it in spades. So it's the horror of Dracula. Apologies for the camera. I'll make the next videos look better. I know this looks terrible, but hopefully you get the decent message here that I love this film.